If you've ever had a child who struggles with getting to school or even making it through the day, you're definitely not alone. Today, we're talking about school can't, a term that shifts the focus away from won't go to school and towards the very real challenges that make school genuinely unmanageable for some kids. Joining us is Mel, a mum whose two children, aged 7 and 9, have faced school can't in different ways. She shares what their experiences have looked like, what's helped, and what she's learned along the way. But this episode isn't just for parents with school age kids. Whether you have younger children, older teens, or work with kids in any capacity, understanding why some children simply can't do school the way it's expected can help us all to create environments where they feel supported and capable and safe. So we'll explore what's happening beneath the behaviour, what signs to look for, and how to approach school can't with curiosity, empathy, and practical support. Let's dive in. I'm Jackie Hall, and this is Beneath Behaviour, where we break down stress, reactions, and get to the heart of why we all do the things we do. We'll have real conversations, find real solutions, and have absolutely no judgment. Let's talk. So, Mel, tell me a little bit about what's happening with your kids. Maybe start with whichever one you want to start with first.
Probably start with my boy because he seems to be having the most trouble like last year and probably starting to again this year. Seemed to have a really lovely teacher who had some great think outside the box type of ideas, but just for whatever reason there was a lot of school can't, and as the year went on and I think as we got tireder and more fatigued, it just got worse and worse to the point where there were days where I wouldn't get in the car. Get out of the car at school, lots of crying and screaming, and it's not fair. I don't want to go to school. I can't go to school. And also just coming out of his room with own clothes on instead of uniform to make the point of I'm not going to school today.
Yeah.
This year it's been going a little bit better, but today it was just seemed to wake up in a really low mood, teary, saying they felt exhausted, didn't want to get off the bedroom floor.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a lot of support to get to school and had to be walked in all the way, and then was really teary when I left. But thankfully, I had a favourite substitute teacher who's a bit silly and makes him laugh. So hopefully that will have cheered him up.
That's so good that he has that support at his school, because a lot of kids don't actually have that support, which makes it even worse for them. So what we tend to do on the Beneath Behaviour podcast is always start off with why, trying to understand what's going on for him to be feeling this way. What must he be thinking? What must he be experiencing? What is life like for him? So have you got any clues? Have you got anything that he said or any kind of patterns in his behaviour that helps us to make sense of why it's so difficult for him to go to school?
The last year, I had quite a few people, parents and teachers both, who said that when they go to grade 3, it's a big leap in terms of what they have to learn. So I don't know if that was a part of it, that it was just all of a sudden the work was a bit overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that there's definitely some, I don't want to call it bullying, but times where, when people are not being at their nicest, he tends to be one that gets targeted, unfortunately, and that
Mm-hmm.
feel a bit less safe at school, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So when we're talking about school can't, and let me just take the opportunity to explain a little bit more about why we call it school can't. Many people will have heard it, or parents would have heard it called school refusal or school avoidance. And when we use those terms, even though that's what it can be, that they're refusing to go to school or they're avoiding going to school, it can actually sound quite defiant when we call it avoidance or refusal, because it just sounds like I'm not going to school, which is the behaviors that we're seeing. But underneath that, we're seeing protective strategies that if we felt uncomfortable going into a work environment day in, day out, we would be trying to do our utmost not to go into that work environment or trying to avoid it or refuse it as much as we can, right? So we prefer to call it school can't, because sometimes the kids don't feel safe at school or they don't have the resources to handle what's going on at school, and they literally can't bring themselves to go to school because it is a protective strategy. And when we're looking at it from that point of view, we often feel a lot more compassion for the experience that they're having, and we're more naturally wanting to jump into understanding why that makes sense to him to be like trying to avoid going to school. So when we're looking at school can't as an overall topic, we need to break it down into different areas of schooling that could be potentially challenging for him so that we can deal with each one in an isolated way. Now, this could be, like you were saying, the academic side of things, that the workload's just gotten a little bit heavier. So that's a challenge to him. It could be the social element where he's struggling with relationships and we need to support him in that way. Other things that could be going on is sensory challenges. So when I'm in the classroom, I'm struggling to hear, I'm struggling to process the information, I'm struggling to with noises like fans or air conditioners, or I get easily distracted by other noise that's going on. If I'm at the back of the room, the teacher's voice tends to drown out, other things that are going on. We need to look at the relationship with the teacher and the relationship with other staff members and other kids that are going on at the school. Because if we look at these things as isolated categories that can all accumulate into school can't, it kind of makes sense why he may be struggling, because they start to stack up. And sometimes, even though, like, for example, when we're helping, if we were to help him with the social element, that may not be a quick fix. That might be something, depending on what that element is, and we'll get to that in a second. That might take some time to teach him what he needs to learn, or to help him to kind of navigate those tricky waters. But if we're also then able to recognize that there's something going on in his environment that we can fix straight away, we can move him to a certain part of the classroom where he's able to concentrate more, or the teacher can tweak how she's delivering information so that he can process it easier. And if we're then working on the relationship with the teacher so that the communication is a little bit different, those two things we've just taken off that list that he stacks up on. And so it can make the social side of things a lot more bearable. It kind of acts as like a buffer that he's able to deal with or tolerate some of those things that he's struggling with, because the other things have been taken off the table, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So if we were to isolate, what part of some of those categories were like kind of resonated for you, like that might be going on for him?
I don't think the sensory challenges was as much of a problem last year. He's already identified that that's a bit of a problem this year.
Okay. In
That's,
what way?
and that the class is really loud. But
Mm-hmm.
really, which is not something he's ever done before, he's got a teacher now, I think, and she seems to be quite understanding, and I think she has some personal experience of autism. And he was able to go into her and tell her that it was too loud for him and have some time sitting in a quieter area. And
Yep.
I followed that up with an email, and they've actually provided him with some headphones, which is great. So that's kind of
Fabulous. Yeah. And just on that, that's great that we've been able to find that solution. But for other parents listening, I also want to kind of highlight there that sometimes he can say the classroom's too loud, and we take that literally as the classroom is always noisy. But
mm,
he may be saying at certain points of the day it's loud and he can't handle it. So we then have to break that area down even further to kind of go, okay, what is his definition of too loud? What is his definition of okay? Because another point there is that he, like, that solution worked for him. But if that solution didn't work for him, then we want to kind of recognize at like what does work for him, because it might be that he doesn't want to be isolated to somewhere different, that
yeah,
maybe there's something we can do from a whole classroom perspective that helps all of the kids. Because sometimes if it's too loud in certain environments, like sometimes a lot of kids might feel kind of intimidated by that or even revved up by that, so it can affect kids in different ways. So it's being aware that we don't always have to have a, you know, child specific solution, that we can actually have a whole class solution that benefits all children. And in fact, in disability law and in the teaching education system, there is actually these 3 tiers of support that are meant to be available, so that, and the line is something along the lines of, so that all kids can participate in education like any other child. So there are accommodations that legally need to be made to help the child. But I think where that falls a bit short is first understanding what is the experience that he's having,
Mm.
and what is that specific, outcome that he's needing, that, and can we do that from a child-centered approach, a small group approach, or a whole classroom approach, sometimes even a whole school approach. I get too that that's kind of outside of a lot of parents' power, because you can only have a certain amount of influence over the school. But it sounds like you have a very supportive teaching environment and school environment. Is that the case for you guys?
I think we've certainly had some good teachers. I feel we've had to, I think, push a bit for accommodations. I had a lot of meetings last year and we got an individual plan for him.
Yeah.
With regards to what you're saying about, yeah, the whole class thing, definitely for my daughter, she finds the noise an issue as well, but she does not like to be different. She's really into masking. And so, like, anything like headphones is not going to go for her because she can't tolerate looking different to her friends, or even having time out, extra breaks are OT suggested. But again, it's mixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is why it's so important to get beneath the behavior and really understand, one, what the problem is, and two, what the solution is for that child. Because the last thing we want to be doing is isolating her and making her feel bad about herself and impacting on her self-esteem because she thinks being different means there's something wrong with her, or isolating her means that she's going to look bad in front of her peers and actually take away from some of the vital social experiences. So, for her, it might be having the teacher kind of recognize that there's probably a few kids in the room that prefer a quieter activity, and there may be different ways that the teacher may be able to accommodate breaking up that classroom into those different groups. At times, I mean, I get that that's not always the case, but it's also as well, like, if it's unavoidable that there's a certain activity and that activity is going to get loud, that it is a shorter amount of time and it's followed up with a really quiet activity. So we can blend those things in together, because I understand that teachers can't always be accommodating 100% of the time, but it's creating that buffer. It's about being able to come down from those things. So even if, like, being out in the playground is loud and it's intimidating and it's heightening, it's about recognizing what is it that makes my child feel heightened, and is there anything we can do to prevent them feeling heightened, or if they are a little bit heightened in a certain situation, what can we do after that situation to help come down from that and help that nervous system to recover. Because I think sometimes that's missed as well. And I think, to go into bat for teachers and educations, like, there's so much that they're needing to do that sometimes I think educators feel like they have to make all of these accommodations, and they might have 3 or 4, children in the class that need those accommodations. And it feels too overwhelming because they're only looking at it from an independent, like, child-centered perspective, as opposed to, how can I help the whole class? Or how can I just separate different groups of kids that may prefer one way of getting information or one way of participating, and another? So I think that's kind of a creative direction that we can
Mm.
try to influence teachers to take. But at the same time, I get, we don't want to be telling them how to do their job, right? It's a delicate balance.
It is tricky. What was really helpful last year as well was Autism Queensland came in and they did some observation and then made some suggestions. And most of what they made was like whole class kind of activities
Yeah.
for everyone. Um,
Yeah.
sure how much that got followed up because it was near the end of term, and obviously they now transitioned to different teachers. So they,
Mm-hmm.
they have already emailed and said, they're welcome, they're happy to come back into school and offer some more whole class.
That's awesome.
So yeah,
So I know that Autism Queensland is just like there's an Autism New South Wales, Autism Victoria, Autism, like there's one in every state. Do you know?
I'm not sure because I've never been outside of Queensland really.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, and someone may be able to put this in the comments that maybe that is something that can happen for all schools because I'm pretty sure there is one in most states.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So we've looked at the noise factor. What are some of the other factors going on for your son? Do you think? Are there other categories?
Talks about finding last year he talked about finding maths very challenging. So maths was particularly stood out for him.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So again, we then break it down. We go, okay, so maths is challenging. Is it always maths that's challenging? Like, is it algebra that's challenging? But then when we're talking about shapes and, those sorts of things, that comes really easy to him. So again, we're breaking down and going, okay, he's said this, and let's get a little bit more information from him and also getting information from the teacher. And then when we're looking at that, we're going, okay, so if it's all of maths, what is it specifically that he's struggling with? Is he struggling to understand the concepts of it? Like with anybody who's struggling with maths, we've got to break that down and work out where that sticking point is. So whenever we're trying to make any changes, we've got to look at what the problem is, what the goal is, and what's preventing us from being there already.
Okay.
And I think maths is a really good one because often there is some kind of linear steps that need to happen for us to get to an end result. And if we don't get the fundamentals, and it's kind of like a bit of an analogy for life, isn't it? That sometimes if we don't get the fundamentals of learning something new, then we can't build on it because it's too hard. So it could be that the way that the information is being delivered can be verbal, and we know that some children's executive functioning struggles with processing verbal information. So we're needing to deliver it in a different way, that maybe it needs to be written on the blackboard. Do they still have blackboards at school these days?
Whiteboards, I think, usually.
Whiteboards, right. Showing my age here, aren't I? Some people might be going, what's a blackboard? Yeah, so writing it up on the board or showing it or giving examples, like putting it into the context of something real life. And I know a lot of kids these days are saying, how would I even use this in my life? Why have I got to even learn this stuff because it's not even relevant to me? So I think sometimes, again, we've got to be creative about how we're putting context around some of these concepts so that they're even interesting enough to process that information. But yeah, definitely visuals can be a little bit of a better way. So I get as well, sorry, that some of this is out of parents' control, that you can't dictate what the teacher's doing, but it may be stuff that you may be able to take home to help them. So when they're doing their homework, you may have a different way to come at it and to learn. Or you might be able to find videos on YouTube that, I know that from raising my kids that there's a lot of funny YouTube videos on maths that some people do it and they just have a different way of delivering that information or teaching that. So if you Google what they're learning, you might be able to find a video that helps them. So then we've got the noise factor, we've got the academic side of things. Can you see how if we were able to help him with those two things, then that may actually help him with the social side of things? It might help as a buffer because not everything at school is hard. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
So what are some of the social challenges that he is having that he's said from his point of view he's experiencing?
So he has like a good core group of friends, but I think he feels that, sometimes other children make comments and target, and call names. And he generally feels it's targeted at him or one of his friends often.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Does he have a friend or some friends that he's close with?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're
So,
really
sorry.
sticking up for each other. So he'll he said he actually stuck up for one of his friends last week when the other boys were picking on him, and then they've done that for Byron as well. He's told me that they've kind of spoken up on his behalf. So
Awesome. So that's going to help too. And this is the thing with the bullying side of things. I think the most important thing is that he has his safety net of connections while we're sorting out, because the bullying is absolutely not acceptable, and we do need to be talking to the school about how we can stop that so that he's not getting bombarded with that in his daily life. But at the same time, those kids that are his friends that are showing him, we like you, we love you, we're connected with you, we accept you as who you are, we have fun with you. And he's got those positive reference points of social interaction. He's not drawing the conclusion that, one, there's something wrong with me, and secondly, that it's not his definition of social interactions. He has that
balance.
that comparison, that, and it's easier then for him to draw the conclusion that they're just being mean, as opposed to there must be something wrong with me for them to be treating me like that. So that's what can make it really difficult. And then the other side of things is talking to him about how that feels to him, talking to him about what's actually happening, and it's really important that we get his sense of how he's perceiving it. So when you talk to him about it, what is his perception of what's going on?
He'll say, "Oh, there was a lot of bullying today," and then he'll tell me kind of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
He actually wrote a little book at school last week that is about a superhero, and it's about he was always bullied at school and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And it's playing on his mind quite strongly.
Yeah. So when he was telling you about the bullying, was he saying it in reference to like how he felt about it? Like was he just noticing that there was bullying? Is it always targeted at him? Is it targeted at other people? Like, what's his experience of that?
So I think last week it had happened to a friend, and he was talking about what had happened to the friend and what the bullied boys had been saying to him, the other boys that had been bullying.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, when he's describing it about himself, he'll say what they called him and that kind of thing. He doesn't really like to explore how he's feeling about it. He's not
Yeah. Yeah.
doesn't have the words. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So I think when we're hearing him talk about those things, the very first thing that we want to do, and it's funny, we were just talking about this in the office, it's the one thing that we often forget to do as parents when we're hearing our child talk about something that's difficult. The first thing that we want to do is talk them out of their feelings or tell them what they should do. And the very first step that we need to make is validating that that experience is tough. And we want to say, that sounds like a really difficult thing you're going through, or depending on the rapport, you might say, like, that sounds really crappy, or that doesn't sound like that was very fun at all, or it doesn't sound like that was very fair, like something that just helps him to feel like, I get you. And when you help him to feel like you understand him, he may then be more willing to share how he felt about that or how he's perceiving that. So if you said to him, how did that make you feel? And he can't answer that, you might say, what did you think about that?
Mm,
Because sometimes thinking's easier to express than feeling.
yeah.
So that, because what we want to do is kind of get a sense of, is he personalizing that event? Because that's what we need to correct. Because the bullies are about their behavior, and what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're doing is wrong and not okay.
Mm,
And obviously in the background, we're trying to work with the school for that to not happen. But in the meantime, because the reality is that that is happening right now, we can really use that as an opportunity to reflect on, use it as a life lesson.
yeah.
That what do we think when somebody does something like that? Is he personalizing it? Is he thinking it's because of me? Or is he thinking, no, they're just being mean? Because if they're just being mean, like, that's better than thinking there's something wrong with me. I must be doing something wrong. At the same time as well, it might be helpful to contemplate Why does he think those other kids are doing that? Like, let's try to make sense of what's going on beneath their behavior. Because the reason why, and this is what we want to talk about, there's always a reason. It's never okay, but there's
Yeah.
always a reason why somebody tries to be mean. And sometimes it's because they're hurting, or sometimes it's because they're feeling a little bit insecure and they're trying to feel more powerful. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes kids can come from a home where, you know, it's a little bit chaotic, that maybe people fight all the time and that's all they know. You know, so sometimes we can jump into the world of someone else and kind of make sense of it, even though it's not okay and we're going to try and stop it. You know, it just, again, by contemplating that, helps him to realize that that child's behavior is not about him. So, from a mental health perspective, we want to be having those conversations. But then also from a practical point of view, we also want to be giving him some strategies and working with him on what he can do when the bullies are saying those things to either him or his friends. You know, can he move away from them? Can he not be around them in the first place? What is within his control that helps him to avoid those kids in the first place?
Yeah.
And what is the school's protocol for that?
Yeah, so I asked for a copy of the bullying policy last year, and apparently it was being updated, and they weren't able to provide me with such a thing. And every time I've kind of talked about incidents, it's very much minimised, and they're told it's not. I'm told it's not bullying. That's too strong a word.
Okay. Yeah.
Kids being kids, but you know, when you have a child who is a more feeling child, you know, he's very similar to me as a child, and I
Yeah.
family, you know, it can leave lasting effects.
Yeah. And I think the difference here, and sometimes, and I think this is something that happens to us parents a lot, is you watch history repeat itself.
Yeah.
And I know, and I think I might have told you the story off camera, but I think it's valuable for people to hear it. That when my so when I went to school, I had girls that would like me one day and hate me the next, and that happened all the way into high school until I just went, no more, I'm not doing that anymore, and I broke that pattern. But it was painful going to school and not knowing whether I was going to be liked or not, and feeling like it was, you know, it, like you said, it has that lasting impact, right? It makes you feel, what's wrong with me? Why don't people love me? And there's this real self-worth element that comes with that experience. And so when my son went to prep, he came home and told me that he had no one to play with. And I was mortified that, like, because I went straight back into my child self and just kind of remembered that pain and was just horrified and hurt that he was going through that same experience. And so they had this no friends chair that the kids were meant to sit in if they didn't have any friends in the playground. And these kids were meant to notice that someone was on the chair and then come up and say, do you want to play? And I was like, what are you talking about? You're expecting these kids that just are totally in the moment and in their own zone to, one, notice this child, and secondly, think to go up and ask this child to play. How long does that child need to sit there before they start thinking, why is nobody coming for me? So I was totally projecting my childhood hurts onto this situation. I had a whole letter written up about why this was psychologically damaging and they shouldn't have this chair. And then he came home from school and he's like, because I said, don't you sit in that chair. And he sat in the chair, and one of the kids from his class noticed him, came and got him, and they were best friends all the way through prep. And I
Awesome.
was like, what do I know? And I
Yeah.
realized in that moment that I was totally projecting my experience onto him. So I think that's worth being aware of, that your experience doesn't necessarily equate to his experience.
Yeah, and I do have to be really mindful of that, I think, and I often have to take a breath and step back before I kind of respond because,
Yeah.
yeah, I do kind of feel it. that's really easy to make that mistake. But
Yeah, because you'll be looking to at all the evidence you have of the sameness of that experience. And while you're doing that, because whatever we put our attention on is what we find evidence of. And so when you're doing that, you're not looking for evidence of how it's not the same. And so you're not looking for the evidence, or not unless you're being deliberate. You're not necessarily looking for the evidence of how he actually does have friends in this scenario. He
mm,
actually isn't personalizing it. We don't know that yet, but he may not be personalizing it like you do. And thirdly, I think parents, and especially yourself, is a lot more aware of mental health elements. And if you're having these conversations with him, that helps add these different perspectives where you're looking at what might be happening for the bully, where you're validating his emotions, you're talking to him about how he thinks about it, how he feels about it. I never had any of that when I was growing up. It was just like you just suck it up and just get on with life. But I think parents these days are a lot more attentive to how children are feeling and helping them to work through those challenges from a psychological perspective. So even from that point of view, this doesn't equal your experience. Would that be accurate?
yeah, definitely. Because as I was growing up, mum was always like, "You just need to hit them back," and that personality. But yeah, no, like there's definitely been a couple of the boys that when they have kind of picked on it, I've been able to, I've known what's going on through their mums about like challenges at home, and I've been able to say to them, this is what's happening for them. I think that's why they're maybe not being like their normal selves. But like other times, I guess it's a bit harder when you don't know what's going on for those kids. But
Yeah, and this is the reality of it, is that you're not always going to know, but you can know how your child is taking it in terms of their own self-worth.
yeah,
And if we're giving kids, and I think in in our day growing up, this wasn't so prominent because a lot of the times you were just left to your own devices. Like it was more rarer that you had parents that were invested in how you were growing up and what you were doing. So you can be more deliberate these days about giving them experiences that build on their self-worth so that they act as that buffer to challenging times like this. So they're just seeing it as this is a difficult time as opposed to I am a bad person because I'm having this experience. And it's such a vital separation that needs to be made. That if I have all of this evidence of all the things that make me feel good, or I'm around people who love me, like me, value me, respect me, enjoy my company, like what I say the majority of the time.
yeah,
And if that experience for some parents can't be at school, then we make that outside of school. We do extracurricular activities, or they might have an online gaming community, or you might be able to do it with family or get involved in, churches or community groups where we start to become part of a community or a family of people that help build that self-esteem so that he's got that reference points that, you know, I'm okay. I'm a good person, even though I might be going through this, challenging situation at school, if that
yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah,
And it sounds like he has quite a good buffer zone there that we can really keep working on and be aware of more deliberately.
yes.
Yeah. So, are there any other elements other than those three that you feel are contributing to the school can't?
I think what I really saw today, and I think was happening more and more towards the end of last year, is the fatigue of masking. I think, and
Yeah.
the just fatigue related to being autistic, ADHD, and having hypermobility issues. It's just like
Hmm.
everything's harder. It's harder to hold your muscles in certain places, and it's
Yeah.
right and hold a pen and sit up at a desk all day, and yeah,
Yeah. Masking in general, we want to find out why they feel that they need to mask. What areas are they actually masking? What does masking even look like for your particular child? So that the teachers can be aware of the signs of that mask starting to kind of like because the masking is that they often fall apart at home, right?
yeah,
So what are the signs that that effort is accumulating? Because we may not necessarily, like, as we start to build that self-esteem, and if you are an educator listening to this, you're able to build a classroom of inclusivity and celebrate differences and create this culture in the classroom that we're all different and it's okay that we have different needs, and we're really celebrating that. It reduces the child's need to mask, for starters, and secondly, we're wanting to kind of work out if because he's trying to obviously hold the pen right, sit up straight, all of those things that he may even feel is necessary to be included. And it may not be sometimes that the teacher can accommodate those sorts of things, but let's add in some breaks. Like, how can we help him to have a break from that so that we're not having this constant 6, 7 hours of my day accumulatively masking and getting exhausted by all of that? How can I just not have to sit there and hold my pen? Like, there be limited amounts of time that he's needing to write? Can he be typing instead of writing to get the work done? Because sometimes, and a lot of the time, the intent of the subject that we're learning is not about handwriting. It's about learning the information. It's about being able to, put sentences together, but we can put sentences together through typing. We don't have to be writing with a pencil all the time. And rarely do any of us do that anymore anyway. But I get it's a skill. So it might actually be part of his day, but it may not necessarily have to be all of his day or for long periods of time. So it's again breaking that masking down and going, okay, what is really difficult for him in that classroom? Like sitting at that desk, is there opportunities that he can maybe sit on the floor? Or is there an area of the classroom where, kids can sit, or can the class be broken up into certain periods where we're sitting and certain periods where it's followed by then sitting down and doing an activity? So it's looking at how we can help him to not have to mask the entire time that he's at school. But to do that, we have to get a sense of when and how is he masking, and can we help him to feel like he doesn't need to mask, or can we break it up?
Yeah, and I think when he's out at break times with his friends, I think he's probably not masking at those times, but yeah, for him.
Fabulous. That's not always the story of a lot of autistic kids, is that normally it can be the other way around, or it can just be that both in and out of the classroom there's an amount of masking. So how wonderful that he doesn't feel like he has to mask around his friends. Like, that tells me a lot about that buffer for
Yeah,
him when it comes to the bullying.
had a really helpful thing where they could access the library at break times if they didn't want to be around all the other kids, and that was kind of like somewhere they didn't have to mask, and they had a Lego in there.
Awesome.
Helpful, but that's now been removed, and he said that the only thing you can do in there is read a book, so reading's not his thing. So now he's not.
Yeah. So that could be something that maybe can be advocated for. Maybe there was a reason why the Lego was taken away, but can it be replaced with something else, like a puzzle, maybe? Like, it's still building something, that helps him to just really focus in on one thing, as opposed to, managing all of these things in the environment that is too hard to manage. Sometimes it is easier to just be able to focus on one thing. Or is he able to bring something from home that he's allowed to sit in the library and do himself? Something that can be accommodating in that way.
Yeah.
So I just want to just quickly, some of the things that we've been discussing today, does that kind of transfer over to your daughter? Or is there anything additional that you wanted to kind of discuss in terms of how we can support your daughter too?
I think most of that, and I think the only other thing is that she's told her OT that she does a lot of picking when she's feeling anxious or bored,
Mm-hmm.
or something's just not quite right, like picking at her skin till she bleeds, and she's told the OT that she's been doing that in class, and we've definitely noticed at home
Mm-hmm.
during the long holidays, everything was low demand, there was virtually no picking, and now it's like constant, and she's covered to the point where I have to take her to the GP today because everything's looking kind of sore and possibly infected.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, again, we want to validate that we get that there are times where she's feeling a little bit anxious, and the picking can feel like it is soothing,
Yeah.
because that's why she does it. So again, we're looking at, why does that behavior make sense? Because it soothes her, it helps her to calm down. So what we're needing to do is try to find an alternative to that. Like, is there like like, one of those balls that, those rubber balls that maybe she could pick. She just has to learn to clean up her mess afterwards. But it could be that she's actually picking that. Is there an alternative that the OT can maybe suggest that provides the same sense of relief?
Yeah. And the OT's been exploring that with her. And the problem has been we didn't have any contact details for either of her teachers.
Mhm.
I asked for that last week and didn't get it. So I asked again yesterday and finally got some email addresses, which I've sent to the OT because she wants to connect with them and kind of make some recommendations of things that are helpful for my daughter. So,
Awesome. Yeah. So that's that's the practical element of it. And then the other side of it is the psychological element where we're looking at what is making her nervous in the first place to feel like she needs that soothing. Like, how can we break that down? Like, what are the different times of the day? Are there times of the day where she is picking more than others? Are there situations that she's finding difficult? Because at the end of the day, we want to understand what she's feeling to see that behavior. So it's getting beneath the behavior to understand what the problem is, what the ideal is, and how we can meet that, like bridge that gap
mm,
between where she's at and where we want her to be so that she's feeling, you know, regulated anyway. So she doesn't actually need to use that tool at all. But in the meantime, obviously, we're needing that alternative so she's not hurting herself while she's doing it.
mhm.
Awesome. So I think, you've really like highlighted so many key areas that is crucial for understanding when it comes to school can't. And I think you can see how easy it is to have those accumulated and lead to all of school is too difficult, I'm not going. So if you can just kind of isolate those things and really get underneath it, make sense of it, get the information both from your child, from the teachers, from your observations, and find the patterns in the behavior. And then when you're talking to your child, it's, validating their experience. Yeah, that's really hard. That sounds really tough. Like, tell me more. Like, help them to really share what's going on for them and empathize with them, because that's going to help them feel heard. It's going to help them feel seen, and it's going to help them feel like, I get you. And that's such a vital step first before we jump into solutions. Um, and then from that solution place, it's like, okay, how can we come at this from a child-centered space? So what are some of the resources and upskilling we can give the child? But at the same time, we've talked a lot about how we can work with the environment. So when we're doing things from small groups, a whole class perspective, or, looking at environmental changes that we can make, or, accommodations that we can make, that we're not making this all about what the child has to do to change. We're also looking at what we can get the environments or their relationships to do that also help to influence the experience the child has.
Mm.
So I really hope that you're able to kind of take some stuff from that, and that we can make life a little bit easier for your kids.
Yeah, that sounds really good. It sounds like a lot more conversations with school again. I feel like they're
Yeah. And I think that's such a difficult reality that parents face, is you're going to be doing a lot of advocating for your kids.
yes.
And
I
you
feel,
may end up being that, annoying parent that's always, well, you think it's annoying, but sometimes some teachers are seeing it as quite helpful. But it depends on how you deliver the information. So again, just how I said about, approaching your child with validation and empathy, do the same with the teachers. I
yeah.
get this is hard. I get that you've got 30 kids in the class and mine isn't the only one that has needs. How can I help you? How can I work with you so that we can, help all the kids, and how I can help my child at the same time to integrate with your ways in your classroom. And, I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. Like, just that whole kind of surrender and I get you is going to get you a lot further than, if someone was to go in and go, you're not doing this, you need to do more for my child, which, some parents do. So we have to handle this with compassion, because it's not easy for the teachers either. But looking at your own kind of mindset and kind of going, okay, where am I at in this expectation that it should already be being delivered to my child? Sometimes they don't know what's been happening for your child. Sometimes they don't know your child's masking. They don't know those little, needs that you do. And sometimes it's more about educating and giving that information to the teacher than it is, thinking that they don't care.
I definitely felt like last year with my daughter that there was a bit of a vibe of it. You're kind of making it up because she's perfect in class.
Yeah.
Because they're
Yeah.
not up on the subtle stuff at all.
Yeah. And I think that it can be helpful to let them know what masking looks like for your child. And for some kids, that can be it's facial expressions, they'll start to get, fidgety in their chair, or they'll give you, some sort of tone of voice will change, or some sort of behavior will change. There will be a difference in how she is at home. So if you give them that visual or that verbal comparison to what's not masking and what is masking, then and when it happens and why it happens, then that can help the teacher to sometimes be aware of it, because a compliant child doesn't always mean a happy child.
Yes.
And sometimes that compliance can easily be mistaken for she's fine in class, she doesn't have any problems.
Yeah.
So giving them those specifics can really help as well.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely something that resonates, like because they're compliant and they don't cause any troubles, it's kind of like, I feel like sometimes it's hard to get the school to help with meeting needs.
Yeah, yeah, because it becomes like if I don't see it obvious, then it's not causing a problem.
It's just about your parenting at home, you're doing something wrong kind of thing is the feel I get from them.
Yeah, and sometimes that feels like, that's the case, but you've just got to keep trying different ways. I always believe everybody has an entry point. Everybody has a way that we can kind of get through to them. And then sometimes in worst case scenarios, it just might be that the school is not accommodating and school just doesn't have the culture needed for your child. I don't feel like this is probably the case for you. But for other parents, it might be that we have to seek other alternatives because it's compromising your child's self-esteem too much. Like their mental health is of the utmost importance. You can learn at any time in your life, but it's a lot harder to undo mental health challenges that have come from the experiences of being dismissed and picked on and bullied and ignored. So I think that's a really good place to end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. I just know that, so many parents struggle with school can't, and you've been so helpful in being able to highlight the different areas that we need to look at. So we're not looking at it as just one issue. We're actually looking at it as several different issues that accumulate into school can't. So thank you so much, Melissa. I appreciate your time. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Beneath Behaviour podcast. Now don't forget to subscribe on your favourite podcast channel so you never have to miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.